I want people to view it as if it were an image that had been taken hundreds of years ago, like when the castle was built. So I want people to be able to be transported back to that environment. Whereas if you've got power lines and you've got cars and people with baseball caps walking around, it's just going to kill the vibe. So I'm picking my time very carefully. I'm picking my angles very carefully.
Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 386 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week on the podcast, I sat down and had a great conversation with UK photographer Jim Scott. Jim hails from an area of England known as Northumberland, which is known for its fascinating coastal geology as well as its numerous castles. Jim has been working on a project to photograph every single castle in Northumberland. In this week's episode, we delve into the challenges and benefits of working on such a focused project. Before we dive in, I wanted to stop and thank our recent financial supporters. This podcast is fully funded by listeners via PayPal, Venmo, and of course, Patreon. If you would like to support the show, please visit mattpaynphotography.com/podcast or find a link in the show notes. Thank you to Riza Smithson, Andreas Roth, Monique Tuttle, and Geotagging for your generous support. Cheers. Okay, let's get to this week's conversation with Jim Scott. All right, Jim Scott, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Fantastic to be here. I'm looking forward to it, Matt.
Thank you for coming up with something interesting and unique.
That's my pleasure. I'll let the listeners decide whether it is unique or how unique it is. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Right on. Well, Jim, for people who aren't familiar with you and your photography, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Jim Scott. I am from Northumberland, which is the northernmost county in England. Sorry, it borders Scotland. So but as far north as you can get without leaving the country. 47, married, 3 kids. Photography isn't my full-time gig, so I do have a day job. I run a division of a property portal in the UK. You probably won't have heard of them, but they're a household name in the UK. So photography is a passion. It's a hobby. It's something I do in my spare time, basically.
Nice. And I'm guessing, just like a lot of photographers, the photography is kind of a method of escaping the real world a little bit.
Yeah, it is, and we're really lucky in Northumberland because we've got a little bit of everything. So we've got the coastline, so we're on the east side of the country. So we get the sunrises, which is one of the things that attracted me to photography in the first place. But we've got rolling hills, we've got forests, we've got pretty much everything on the doorstep. So whatever mood takes my fancy, I can get access to any of those things really quick.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've recently just got done prejudging for the Natural Landscape Photography Awards, and there were quite a few submissions and projects from that area of your country. So,
oh, really?
Some really beautiful stuff, especially on the coast, like a lot of really interesting coastal stuff. So really cool.
Yeah, I'm surprised at that because it's not a particularly well-known part of England, let alone part of the world. So the fact that you've got a few entries from here is a little bit surprising, to be honest.
Yeah, it looks like a really amazing place that I would love to visit someday.
Yeah, you've been to the UK, right?
It's funny. I have been to Ireland.
Okay.
And I'm going to Scotland next year, but I've never spent any time inside of, I don't want to anger any of the listeners, but I guess I've never spent any time inside of what you might call like England, right?
Right. Okay.
So yeah, haven't done that yet.
Yeah, there are some good spots. I'm a little biased. I think the Northeast is the best spot, but that's just me.
Yeah. Well, cool. So maybe just kind of tell us a little bit more about where you live. I mean, feel like most people have potentially never really even heard of Northumberland, and I would love for you to tell us a little bit about kind of what it's like there. What's the draw photographically speaking?
Well, Northumberland is, I Googled this before the podcast, just to give you a comparison. is almost exactly the same size as Delaware, right? So that gives you an idea of the size of it's the least populated county in England. So there's only about 320,000 people live in the county. So as I say, it borders Scotland. We're very famous for castles. So we've got more castles in Northumberland than any other part of England, and that's for obvious reasons. So we had to keep the Scots out. Many years ago, we had to keep the Vikings out. Everybody wanted in, but now there's a lot of them lie in ruin. But some of them are still lived in today. So Alnwick Castle, which was they filmed Harry Potter there. I think they filmed one of the Transformers movies there. The Duke of Northumberland lives in the castle. That's his home. We've got Bamborough Castle, which was the subject of the Last Kingdom movie. Lindisfarne Castle, which was the Viking series, was part that started in Lindisfarne. So loads of history, and it goes back even further. So it goes back to the Roman Empire. The Hadrian's Wall, which was built from coast to coast across the north of England, is kind of at the southern part of Northumberland. So lots of history, lots to see, and lots to photograph as well, obviously.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, let's just dive into this thing here. So I know that you've got a project that you're working on, and you've called it, perhaps creatively, we'll see, but the Northumberlander project. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit about what your project is and what you hope to accomplish with it.
Okay, so the project started around about this time last year, a little bit earlier. It's probably spring last year, and I'd photographed the big 5 castles. So there's 5 castles that are pretty famous. Everybody knows where they are, and most people have been there. And Alnwick is one of them, Bamborough is another one, Lindisfarne, etc. But I photographed all of them a bunch of times at this point. So I said to my wife at the time, I wonder how many castles there are in Northumberland, because I didn't know. And I Googled it, and it took a little bit of searching. I went around the houses a little bit, but I found this number of 70 castles in Northumberland, more than anywhere else. And this number kept coming up, but I couldn't find a list of all of the castles anywhere. I eventually tracked it down. There was 2 sources of lists of all of the castles in Northumberland, and there was 1 or 2 images on there, but not a great deal. And as it transpires, if it exists, I haven't been able to find it. There is no photographic record of all of the castles in Northumberland. So that's what kind of set me on the path to try and capture all of them. Some of them are in great states of repair. So Alnwick being an example, it's a home. It's well looked after. It's a visitor attraction. So it's kind of, as far as castles go, it's in good condition. But some of them are in a really bad state of repair. And some of them are just sites where you have ruins, or the Motte and Bailey, which is the raised ground that they're built on, is the only thing that's left. And some of those are even, are eroding. The earth around them is eroding, so that we're even losing them. So it won't be long before some of them are lost to time. So I just thought it's the right thing to do. It gives it a bit of a purpose, is to record all of these things for posterity, or for future people to sort of look at and understand what they were at this point in time.
I love that. And I'm guessing that within that concept, there's a kind of an appreciation for the rich history that's entangled with the castles, as well as I'm suspecting there's some challenges relating to photographing them in a little bit further beyond a more documentary style. Because obviously, you can show up to a castle with an iPhone and say, yep, here's the castle.
Yeah.
But doing it in more of kind of a classical landscape photography style seems to me would be a little challenging.
It is. And some of the images that I've taken so far, I'm not happy with, and I'm going to return to those particular castles. But what I want to try and do is I want to try and get through all of them. And I actually think there's more than 70. So I think I found another couple. But I want to get through all of them and get them documented first. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make the images about the castle rather than of the castle. So I'm trying to take in, a lot of them are situated on cliff tops or sort of craggy rock outcrops, or They sit in sort of big estates of land or whatever. So I'm trying to make sure that I bring some of those elements into the images as well, to give it a bit of character and tell a little bit of a story as to where each of the castles sits, because there are some, as I say, there are some that are in ruin. Some are right on the coast. So Bamborough, as an example, has a beautiful beach which stretches out for a few miles, like literally right in front of the castle. And some of them are on rivers, some of them are in woodland. So it really varies. So you can bring some of that in, but the temptation is just to take an image of the castle.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I can't remember who I was talking to who lives over there, but I feel like when people come to the United States, especially kind of like the southwest part of America, like Arizona and New Mexico and Western Colorado and Utah, there's kind of this obsession from people in Europe about like the kind of Americana, like the old, Route 66 signs and like old gas stations. And I feel like most people over here, like, it is what it is. Like, it's part of what's here and we kind of take it for granted. On the flip side of that, I'm curious, is it kind of the same in terms of the castles? Like the people over there, are you guys just like, we have castles, they're kind of cool. And us Americans go over there and like, holy cow, look at these amazing castles.
It really is exactly like that. So, and I've been guilty of it myself in my younger days. It's probably only the last few years that I've really come to appreciate the history that's attached to them. So even the town I live in, there's two castle sites within a mile of my house, and you kind of drive past them every day, and people don't give it a second thought. Because they're all over, particularly in this part of the world, which is a real shame because it's part of the heritage, it's part of the history of the region. But it is very much as you described. By the way, I'd love to get over to New Mexico and capture some of that Americana stuff as well. So
sure, it's just funny because like I drive by that stuff all day long, every day, and it's just like whatever. But I feel like people from the UK would be like, dude, pull over the car, we got to photograph that.
I just bought my first I'm saying my first in a long time film camera as well. And I've been looking at a lot of that stuff on film on Instagram and places like that. And I'd love to get out there with a film camera. Looks fantastic.
Right. Well, so relating to castles, I'm thinking, castles have a ton of rich history, probably even like a little bit of archaeological intrigue, like the building materials, depending on the when the castle was constructed. I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit about kind of what's your approach to capturing the essence of each individual castle, with the caveat that whenever I teach workshops in a location that I've never been to before, I always tell our students, like, I think your goal should be to capture 10 photos of this place that help tell the story of what it is. And it can be a big scene, it can be a small scene, it can be an abstract, it can be close-ups and detail shots. So what's your approach for the castles?
That's a good question. Because I'm trying to document them for the project, I'm trying to get as much of the castle or the entire castle into the frame, if possible. And I'll come back to how I'm being a bit more creative with it in a second. But I want to try and capture as much of the castle as I can and some of the environment. As I mentioned before, I think that's really, really important because it gives people an idea not just of the construct of the castle and the scale of the castle, because some of them are huge and some of them are actually pretty small. But it gives people an idea of the size and scale and the environment and so on and so forth. But what I am also doing is I do like to go back to the site. So once I've documented the project from a project perspective, I like to go back to the sites, having been there, know the lay of the land, know exactly where I might be able to get a better shot from, or a sunrise shot, or when there's a different type of light or storm or whatever it might be. So I'm starting to go back to the sites as well to get more creative, more eye-catching shots as opposed to documentary shots as well. So that's kind of how I'm approaching it at the moment. And I've got a few that I've been back to a whole bunch of times, and I've got a lot of different shots from, and I actually see it as quite a. I'm just learning. I mean, I've only been doing this for just under 3 years to be 3 years in sort of November time. So I've still got an awful lot to learn about photography. So going back to the same sites, I find quite a challenge in a positive sense. So it pushes me to look at the same thing in different ways, from different angles, with different vantage points, and bring different things into the frame and so on.
Right. So I'm curious, like, you've been doing the project for a couple of years now. What's perhaps been the most surprising aspect of working on the project? Maybe from a photography's perspective, but also kind of like a personal benefit perspective.
From a photography perspective, I think one of the most surprising things is how little people appreciate the form of castles. So because what you find with a lot of them is that they're quite the fortification or the castle wall, the curtain wall, hides within it more structures. So you to try and get all of that to look right, because there's cliched images of most of these castles, or a lot of these castles. So you like Dunstanburgh Castle is another famous one, and there's a very cliched image of that. There's a cliched image of Alnwick. There's a cliched image of Bamburgh that everybody will recognise. So trying to avoid those things, but still get the depth and get the perspective, bring everything into the frame. That's probably been one of the things that's been most surprising to me is how much of a challenge that can be. Benefit to me is I think it's opened up a completely different type of photography to me. So rather than just going after the great light or the sunrise or those sorts of things, I'm now going after documenting something which is a completely different brief altogether. So it's kind of taught me a little bit more about recording things as opposed to creating things, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because I feel like there's like a Venn diagram, right, of like art and documentary photography. And I think what I love about landscape photography is that you can have both happening at the exact same time, and it's always tricky from the perspective of the photographer, like how documentary do you want the image to be versus how artistic do you want it to be. And I feel like there's this kind of misconception out there that those two things are mutually exclusive, and I personally find that you can have both in the same photograph.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to explain it. It's far more articulate than mine. But yeah, I think that's very much the case. And the beauty of this is that they do cross over, but because I'm familiar with the sites, I can go back and I can kind of influence that Venn diagram, and I can push it further into the creative space or pull it back further into the documentary space. And I've done both in kind of follow-up visits. So yeah, I think that's a great way to explain it.
Relating to returning to the same subject or the same places over and over and over again, I'd be curious if you could talk a little bit about your personal experience in terms of the benefits that you've been able to discover by returning to those same places.
Yeah, so the one place that I've been back to more times than I can count is Bamburgh, and I've taken shots there from the beach. I've taken them from the rocks. I've had the drone up. I've been to the north of the castle, the south of the castle. I've been inside the castle. So I've done it from every conceivable angle. And again, just in the same way that I mentioned earlier, I find that kind of like a personal challenge. So being able to go back to the same place so many times, and I'm literally talking about hundreds of times, but to go back to the same place and continually look for different shots or different light or whatever it might be, I find quite stimulating. And I've got shots, I think, certainly I know I've got shots that have probably never been taken before. For example, on Christmas Eve, actually, there was we had a lot of and I can't remember the exact scientific term for it, but the pearlescent clouds. There was a huge one above the castle, and I went down and I took an image of the castle with the pearlescent cloud above it, and I don't think that exists anywhere. So that's a really unique shot. But I was able to do that because I knew the place inside out. I knew exactly where I had to be to get the shot with that in the background, and so on and so forth. So I think getting to know a place that well offers itself up to when there are unique conditions. So if you come across a storm or something like the pearl clouds or the aurora or whatever it might be, you know exactly where to place yourself to get the absolute best possible shot. So that's been great, and I've learned an awful lot. So I did my first slow shutter down with the seawater. Most of my sunrise shots were, when I first started, were done there. So getting the exposure right and kind of exposing for the highlights and all those kinds of things. So I've learned loads from doing it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I feel like I have the same sort of relationship with a lot of locations close to home here that are for fall color. And it's, when there's really exceptional conditions, like you said, like maybe there's fog and the color's perfect and the light's perfect. It's like I know exactly where I want to be to capture that perspective because I've been there so many times. I know what's going to work and what's not going to work. And I think along those same lines, one of the things about returning to a place over and over again that might be a little counterintuitive is whenever we place a limitation on ourselves, whether it be lens selection or time of year you visit a place or the fact that you're going to a specific location over and over again, I feel like that's a limitation. And whenever we do that, it forces us to be a little bit more creative. And so I think as you return to a place over and over again, you're like, okay, how can I do this differently this time? Right. So I think it's a really good habit to get into.
Yeah, I agree. And where would it be for you, Matt? Where would your go-to place that you've been more than anywhere else?
Oh, I mean, there's definitely several locations here in Southwest Colorado or Central Colorado in fall that I've revisited, probably 10, 15 times over the years. And every time I go back, I find something a little bit different, or maybe I find an intimate scene that I maybe previously had overlooked because the light was different, or maybe now it's got snow. And so like the snow completely transforms that scene. So I love revisiting forests or mountainous areas that look different at different times of the year and things like that. So I think it's a fun way to approach it.
Yeah, and I think what it also does as well is, well, certainly for me, is there are shots I'm waiting for now because there's one shot at Bamborough because on the probably maybe once or twice a year we get snow on the beach. So so I want a snow shot with snow on the beach. On the castle, obviously, and on the sand dunes and so on and so forth. So I've got that in my mind. I almost got it this year, but the sky wasn't playing ball. So I did get I partially got the shot, but so there's certain things that I'm waiting for because I know the area as well, and I know what it will look like in those conditions.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but for me, having that knowledge, recognizing the potential, like, oh man, if this only had this element, this photograph would be twice as good. I feel like that's a huge part of what's fun about landscape photography is that you can return to these places over and over again, and those changes in conditions can make that chase so exciting. I know for a lot of people it becomes frustrating because it's like, oh, the light wasn't what I wanted it to be. And then I think there's a temptation for people to, do all of the work in post to maybe swap a sky or, change the light that didn't exist, things like that. And I understand that appeal, but I think that kind of long road approach is very satisfying.
Yeah, I'm an absolute novice and a liability with Photoshop and any kind. So I use Lightroom, but I've never replaced a sky. I kind of, I know there's a philosophical debate about it, and people have different views, which is absolutely cool. But for me, I like to capture it as close as I can in camera. I will edit it in Lightroom, and I might enhance colours or change, a little bit. But the spot removal is about as far as I'll go in terms of
Right.
manipulating an image. I don't get the whole sorting skies out. It's not my thing.
All good. So, relating to your goals for this particular project, including transporting the viewer to another time and place, what techniques are you using to maximize this impact in the work that you're creating?
Well, one of the things which was a decision I made very early on, was that the images that I take for the project were going to be a little bit moodier than my normal images. And the reason I took that decision was twofold. One was because I felt it reflected a little bit more the kind of, not that it's necessarily a dark history of castles, but it was a time of conflict and war and that kind of thing. But also, we get 364 days of cloud in Northumberland. So if I was waiting for the Great Light to get to 70 different castle sites, I would never ever have completed the project. So the look I'm going for is a kind of darker, a little bit moodier. So I think that helps people view it as a bit more of a story, and it does help to transport them into a different mindset. Whereas if it was a pretty sky and some beautiful light and all that, you're going to look at the image very differently. So I'm trying to use mood and kind of that kind of darker skies and the lack of color. So there is color, it's the color images, but there isn't really vivid color in them. So I'm trying to keep it quite muted as well.
That makes sense. So, in terms of conveying mood, you're potentially kind of underexposing some of the scenes to make them a little bit darker and kind of moodier, and then having a little bit less color saturation to make it feel a little, I don't know if gloomy is the right word, but a little subdued in terms of the mood. That makes a lot of. Are there other techniques you're using to convey mood?
I'm trying to, not that I haven't mentioned, but I think really the sum and substance of it is around just trying to make sure that it is viewed as a historical building. I'm trying to make sure that I don't bring in, wherever it's possible, any modern structures or parked cars or those sorts of things, because I want people to view it as if it were, obviously it's impossible, but an image that had been taken hundreds of years ago, like when the castle was built. So I want people to be able to be transported back to that environment. Whereas if you've got power lines and you've got cars and people with baseball caps walking around, it's just going to kill the vibe. So I'm picking my time very carefully. I'm picking my angles very carefully, and then I'm editing them very carefully as well.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about composition. As I mentioned, just got done doing the prejudging for NLPA, and one of the things that just struck me time and time and time again is the fact that composition is king. I came across so many wonderful images in terms of mood and light, and the editing was really good, but the composition just fell flat on its face. And so I would be curious to hear you talk a little bit about your approaches to composition as it relates to this project, especially given the enormity of some of the castles you're photographing.
Yeah, it's a good question. And although I haven't looked at the focal length at which I've taken all of the images, I would imagine that there's a huge variety of focal lengths, because to your point, for me to be able to exclude some of the man-made structures, because a lot of these things are like way out in the middle of nowhere. Others are on the coast, but others are in towns. So the two castles, I live in a town that I think there's about 17,000 people live in this in the town that I'm in. So it's pretty, it's a decent sized town. And there's two castles there. Now I had to get an image of those castles and try to bring in as little of the kind of modern world as possible. Whereas if you go to some of the castles on the coast, you can go way back, and you can either use a zoom or you can use a really wide lens and bring in as much of the environment as you like, because there isn't anything man-made around. So I think the composition, what's really important to me from a project point of view, as I mentioned earlier, is that the whole castle is visible, or as much of the castle as you can kind of make visible. So that's really important. I tend to make sure that they are in the center of the frame, because it's more like a documentary study as opposed to a creative decision. So I'm, in most of the cases, not in every single one. So that actually the castle in the town where I live, there's a kind of path which leads up to which sort of curves around. So that one I chose to frame off to the right hand side for balance and so on and so forth. So it really depends on the subject. It depends on the environment. There's others which are standing on 150 foot high outcrops of rock. So to be able to go way back and kind of frame that as it kind of looks like it's growing from the ground, and the castle sitting on top of the almost as if it's grown from the rock. So it really just depends on the circumstances, and I'm trying to bring in as much of the environment as I possibly can.
Beautiful. Yeah, you use the word that I find myself using all of the time when it comes to composition, and that's balance. And despite what some people might say on YouTube videos or what you hear constantly touted, the rule of thirds is not necessary every single time you make a photograph. In fact, I personally find that center weighting a composition, especially when there's a single focal point of interest that is kind of the hero of the photograph, I find center weighted compositions to actually be quite pleasing. And so as long as there's balance, right?
Yeah,
So I think I love what you said there about balance, because it's critical.
Yeah, and what you said there about being the focal point, it is the focal point for the project, and the fact that I'm muting down color, I'm going after a dark sky. There isn't anything to distract the viewer from the thing that is being photographed, and that's why I think if it's smack bang in the middle of the image, when it's the right thing to do, with all of these other factors, I think it complements the subject a little bit better.
Totally. Yeah, I find that a lot of people get stuck into like following formulas or rules, like, oh, I have to use the rule of thirds, and if my subject is a castle, I should put it in like one of those thirds on my frame. And what you end up doing if you force the subject into one of those locations is that you might inadvertently introduce other distractions that don't complement the subject. So I think finding balance and finding objects within the frame that complement the main subject is a much better approach to composition.
Yeah, I actually found the rule of thirds somewhat helpful when I first started out, because I do think it helps you to begin to learn the frame and what the options are. But I think the longer I've been doing it, the less I look at it as a kind of guideline of thirds as opposed to a rule of thirds. And
right.
I've got the grid on the back of the camera, so I see it, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to use it. And in most of these images, I've chosen not to.
Well, and to your point, the grid on the frame, I feel like that's actually a very useful compositional tool, because it helps you identify areas within the frame that lack balance, right?
Yeah.
Because if you have a bunch of stuff way over on the left-hand third, and there's nothing on the right-hand third, it's going to feel super left heavy. So I think it is a useful tool, but it's not, I would never call it a rule.
No, I agree, and it's helped me a number of times as well. So if I've got something, whether it be a castle or whatever, and even if you're kind of complementing that on the other side of the frame with a sunrise, it gives you the balance. You can see the balance in the frame, but it isn't something that I stick to rigidly.
Right. Totally. All right. Well, earlier you kind of alluded to the fact that photography is a relatively new pursuit for you, and you've kind of gotten into it fairly late in your life. I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit about what has engaging in a new hobby such as photography brought you, such as skills or other things.
It's emptied my bank account really successfully. That would be, I think, the first thing that it's done. But I think what it's brought me, it's given me the ability to to get out with a purpose, to learn more about the location in which I've lived for 45 years. I've been at it a couple of years now. So I've been here for 45 years. I didn't appreciate the history or the environment to the extent that I should have done. So it's given me all of that kind of stuff. It's introduced me to some new people. I've met some great friends through what I'm doing. It's given me the opportunity to put work into competitions and exhibits and so on and so forth, which I've really enjoyed doing as well. But I think most of all, it's given me a reason to be an insomniac because I just don't sleep. So when I get up in the morning, I've always seen that as a real hindrance. But now, particularly on a weekend, I look forward to getting up at the crack of dawn and getting out with the camera, a bit of solitude, a bit of time to just unwind. I do have a very busy job, and it's great to be able to just take some time back and I can be out. I can do 2-3 hours. Get a photograph or number of photographs that I'm really happy with, and I can get back before everybody else is out of bed. So that I'm not disturbing anything, I'm not interrupting anybody else. So all of that kind of stuff I find really, really, really good, really helpful.
I love that. Yeah, photography is one of those things that if you allow it, it can help you see the world in new ways. It can help you find out things about yourself that maybe you didn't realize before. One of the things I really love about it is you can build a community around yourself and develop relationships with really great people. Even if you don't agree on politics and religion, you still have like a huge passion for photography, and it, for whatever reason, it just kind of overrides the rest of it a lot of the time. So it's a really awesome thing to get into in that from those perspectives.
Yeah, it is, and I think the good thing about photography, in my eyes as well, is that there's different. You can, if you'll excuse the pun, you can apply different lenses to the topic, because you can look at. I'm not a gearhead, but I do. I like to have a look at gear. I like to have a look at what's work. Lens A versus lens B, and I'll read about those. So you've got that side of it. You've got the kind of solidarity and the ability to get out into nature, and then you've got the creative piece. So that, depending on how you want to look at it and what lens you want to apply to it at any given time, I think you can take different things from photography. And as I say, I still think I've got, I'm probably 20% into this in terms of the learning. Now I've got so much more that I can go after. I've recently been out. There's a place called the Farne Islands where we get puffins nesting at this time of year, and there's about 80,000 puffins during the mating season out on the Farne Islands. So I went out last weekend on the boat to capture some puffins out there. And I've always said I'm not a wildlife photographer. I'm really, really terrible. Anything that moves faster than a castle, I really struggle with. So and these things are fast. They're rapid. So I had to kind of think really hard before I got off the boat about the settings and kind of where I wanted to be. So it was again another learning experience, something totally different for me. So I had my settings, then I went looking for the shot rather than find the shot and then decide on the settings. So it was just a totally different way of doing it. But yeah, loads to learn and loving it.
Yeah, well said. One of the things that I love about photography is I feel like I'm never stopping the learning process. Every time throughout my career, every time I felt like I've kind of got things dialed in, then I meet somebody and they're like, "Hey, have you ever tried this?" I'm like, "What?
Yeah,
that's awesome." So
how long have you been doing it now, Matt?
Gosh, 14 years. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're full time now, yeah?
Yeah. For about a year now. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Yep. Well, cool. So relating to that kind of focus on local subjects, what are some other opportunities that have come out of that kind of hyper focus approach to photography?
Probably one of the ones that surprised me the most is when I started the Northumberland project. One of the things that I did was, because I found this list of the 70 castles, but I couldn't find anywhere where some of them were. So some of them have got names that aren't associated with a town or a place. They just have a name. It could have been the name of the people who built the castle or whatever. So I created a Google map and I started pinning as I was finding them. So I pinned all 70 and I shared that on Facebook. And I said, if anybody wants, here's the link. You can kind of just go ahead and download and have a play around and look around and find the different castle sites. And it went absolutely crazy. I think within 48 hours, there was like 2,000 people had downloaded the access to the map. Yeah, and it got to a point where the map topped out. So Google actually sent me an email and said that there's no more. We can't. You're going to have to make the map publicly available because you can't do it on invite anymore because I've hit the top threshold, and I don't know what that is, but it kind of happened really quick. But there was a bunch of local press picked up on this and contacted me and ended up in kind of magazines and national newspapers and so on and so forth. And I actually just had a lady call me earlier today for one of the Northumbrian magazines that does the rounds. Even now, a year and a half into the project, and she wanted to do an article on it. So I think things like that are really interesting, being able to share it. I don't make any money out. I've got no intentions of making any money out of it. That's not why I'm doing it. But being able to share it and try and help people understand what's on the doorstep, I think is really rewarding.
Yeah, that's amazing. And not to go in a negative direction, but I'm curious if you've thought about or heard other people talk about or witnessed yourself any potential ramifications on the negative side of things in terms of like a more public awareness of some of the lesser known locations. Like, for example, like there's places here in Colorado when Instagram got really popular, those places kind of used to be like secrets, like there's like a small circle of photographers and it's like, oh, do you know where that thing is? Like, yeah, I know where that is. Let me tell you how to get there. But now it's like geotagged and people like go there and then the place is just destroyed. So have you had any of that happen in terms of this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I haven't. But it is something that I'm really conscious of, and I do. So one of the things that when I started doing this on Instagram, I would geotag where I was, and now I just put it down as Northumberland, which is 2,000 square miles. So that it's going to be a little bit more difficult. Yeah. So I am conscious of it. It hasn't been a problem. A lot of these castles are on private land as well, by the way. So you have to have permission to access them. So some of them aren't, but many of them are tourist attractions. So you kind of got three categories. You've got the tourist attraction, or four tourist attractions, privately owned, private land, and kind of ruins or things that are generally accessible. It hasn't been a huge issue. Tourism does quite well in Northumberland, and it is one of the bigger parts of the local economy. So I think the way I look at it is, if it's practiced responsibly, I'm supporting a lot of the local businesses who kind of thrive off this sort of stuff. So I think my conscience is clear in that context, but I do think about it, and there are certain. There's one in particular that the owner of the land was very gracious and kind of let me on the land to take the photograph, but they said, please don't post it on social media, which obviously I haven't done, because we don't want people coming back and forward. And English Heritage had just spent a couple of $100,000 like underpinning parts of the structure that was remaining and that sort of thing. So I haven't posted that. So I want to be very respectful to those sorts of situations as well.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's funny because every time this subject comes up, there's a handful of people out there that they're like, well, everyone should have the right to know where things are because it's for all of us. And how dare you withhold information from people so that they can't visit a location? And I always respond with, okay, if you really wanted to find a place, you'll figure out a way to figure it out. You'll find it. And I've found a lot of the people that kind of feel entitled to information are this, and of course I'm painting with a big paintbrush here,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
the people that are like that, with that entitlement, typically they're the ones that just show up and they have very little regard for that place. They're
yeah,
gonna leave trash. They're gonna like do whatever they can do to get the photograph for Instagram, and that's all they care about is like
yeah,
getting the photo for their Instagram feed and to show everyone these amazing places they've been. For example, like I'm sure everyone's heard of all these lavender fields in France, southern France, and there's like this really amazing one in southern France that everyone goes to. And I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, like Instagram just exploded it because people were geotagging it, and then the
yeah,
owners had to put up these big signs that said like "Go away, leave our
yeah,
farm alone." But interestingly, I was talking to one of my colleagues, and he's like, "Yeah, if you just call them and like go to them and spend time getting to know them and talk to them and
yeah,
tell them about how beautiful their farm is and ask them for permission to go photograph their lavender fields, they're very happy to let you do that if
yeah,
you approach it from a respectful
yeah,
way versus just showing up because of
yeah,
a geotag. So I think
yeah.
um, there's kind of a respectful way to approach this situation that I think people need to embrace.
Yeah, I agree. And I have seen a negative side of this. Actually, it was at one of the bigger, the more popular sites, so a kind of tourist destination. You get a lot of overnight camper vans and that sort of thing. But there was a guy from the south of England was up on holiday with his family, and he pinged me and he said, "Look, would you like to meet up?" And so I said, "Yeah, I'll meet you down at such and such a car park for sunrise." And when I got there, I've never seen. I mean, the car park was literally littered with, carpeted with rubbish from these
Hmm.
camper vans. It was atrocious. So, but that same location, the local council has now put up. It's really restricted how and where you can park, and they've kind of cordoned sections off with wooden posts and so on and so forth. So they've had to react to it. So I guess I have seen it, but that is on one of the bigger, more popular locations. It's not one of the smaller sites, because a lot of apart from going to see one of the sites, you'd literally be in the middle of nowhere, standing next to a hill. So I can't imagine many Instagrammers wanting to get a selfie next to a mound of earth, but maybe we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's sad. I was visiting this castle in France last month, and you go there and there's like beer bottles everywhere
Yeah,
and
it's
like trash like overflowing out of the trash
yeah,
cans, and it just smells of urine because people have been peeing there all night long and partying, and it's like there's just such a lack of respect for the
yeah,
places. And it's a resource issue too, because it's like what are the local governments are pretty strapped for money already, and like what are they going to do? Have a security guard there monitoring and policing people's behavior
yeah,
24/7? I don't know what the solution is, but people just need
yeah.
to be a little bit more respectful of these places.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. And as I say, like these sites are people go there because they're beautiful, and then they trash them, which
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, right?
it makes no sense.
Yeah, it's super counterintuitive. So I know earlier you talked about the map and the pinning of the map, and you posted it on Facebook. I'd be curious if you could give us a few more examples of the role that social media has played relating to your approach for the project.
Yeah. So I guess in relation to the project, Facebook has probably been the bigger platform. That's where I've certainly had more interaction. I set up rather than post everything on my page, I set up a group, and I think that group's got, I think it's like 3,500 members now, and all I post in there is the project images and information about the project. But the interest has been, it actually really surprised me because I didn't for a second anticipate the reaction that I got when I posted that map. But that brought with it a bunch of questions and interest, and the group was set up on the back of that. I have, I was posting, and I still do post them on my Instagram account as well. But Facebook was probably the easiest way, because I was with each of the images, I'm putting a little bit of history in there as well. So there's a bunch of copy that goes with the image that probably doesn't sit well on the Instagram type media platform. But in Facebook, I think people are a lot more tolerant of being able to open up an image, enjoy the image, but then read, half a dozen paragraphs of text which explain how long the castle's been around, who built it, which parts of the border wars it was involved in, or Vikings and so on. Then people find that really interesting, and I've had some great feedback in terms of the history, great feedback in terms of the images. But the things that I've got the most from is, you'll have Betty, or say that's where my late husband proposed to me. You brought back some wonderful memories, and blah blah blah. And I get a lot of that sort of stuff, which is, that makes it kind of, I know it's a bit cliche and a bit corny, but it does make it worthwhile, because you're kind of bringing a smile to people's faces on the back of what you're doing as well, which is always good.
Yeah, I love that side of social media when it pops up. And I know there's a lot of people out there listening that are super frustrated with social media. What I found is a lot of people approach social media from a perspective of they just want to get clicks and likes and shares. And I feel like the more healthy approach is to think about it as kind of like a two-way street, where you're offering something of value, whether it be information or a beautiful photograph with accompanying text or a story or history lesson, whatever. And then once that value proposition is met, then people are going to appreciate it, and they're going to comment and like, and you can interact with them and engage with them. And I feel like people don't understand that, like, just posting a photograph without context or something more interesting oftentimes is not going to lead to that engagement. So what advice would you have for people that are frustrated with social media?
Well, I'll start by saying I'm no social media expert, far from it. But I guess philosophically, at least, I agree with everything that you've just said, and I think particularly, I would look at it as different platforms have different purposes and kind of respond better to different things. So the Facebooks, I do think it lends itself a little bit more to the what you just described there, which is the kind of longer form engagement, themes of activity. So if you're posting a picture of, I'll use myself as an example. If I'm posting a picture of a puffin one day and a castle the next day, people will kind of look at it and think, where's this going? So I'm probably not doing myself any favors in doing that. But I think when I was consistently posting about the project, I got an awful lot of engagement. The engagement has kind of dropped off lately, but so is my activity, and so is my kind of clarity of purpose in delivering images from the project. So I think that, from a Facebook perspective, would be my view. From an Instagram point of view, I think that's a really transient environment. So I've probably there's a hardcore of people that kind of follow and respond and kind of interact with my posts. I interact with their posts. But for the most part, I think, it's a case of scroll, like, and people don't give an image more than 2-second worth of consideration, which is why I think, the super bright, big sunrise type shots do really well on Instagram, because they're the things that catch their eye. One of the things I've learned on Instagram is I'll repost stuff that I've posted before, because when you look at the stats, right, you got images that have been seen by 800 people 4 months ago for a second and a half. Nobody's going to remember them. So, you can keep the and I've got into a kind of, I'll post an image a day. So I just schedule them, and it posts one each day on Instagram. Some of them are new, some of them are old. But again, it just kind of, it just sort of takes its course.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's I don't know if you're on Threads or not, but there was a recent thread by this this big content media quote unquote expert. I can't remember his name, but his last name is Patel. And he said, he posted, I think it's Neil Patel. He posted this. We analyzed like millions of Instagram accounts, and we have come up with the best formula to maximize your engagement. It was some ridiculous thing like post a photo every day, post a carousel every other day, post 3 reels, do 2 live Instagrams, and then engage with like over 200 posts or something like that. And I was
Who's
like,
got time for that?
who the hell has time for that? I mean, that's just toxic.
Yeah,
like,
that's
that's
crazy.
just a terrible amount of time to be spending on social media. Like,
Yeah.
so I mean, if that's what it takes to get growth
Yeah.
and engagement on social media, no, thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it that's when it becomes when people are chasing the stats, and that's your business, right? If you're in the business of promoting, then you should be all about the stats, and that's your job. But for the average Joe, for me, it is what it is. The big Aurora storm a few weeks ago. I got a good shot of one of the castles with the aurora above it, which did incredibly well. I mean, like 10 times better than anything I've ever posted on Instagram. It went absolutely crazy, but then it just it dries up like that and it's gone. And once it stopped, once the algorithm, whatever the algorithm is, stopped favoring it, it literally went from getting hundreds and hundreds of likes a day, and it's literally nobody's seen it for like 2.5 weeks now. So it's you're at the and trying to figure that stuff out, I think, is a fool's errand. I don't think you and I will never figure out that algorithm, and I don't think we should try. I don't think it's a healthy thing to try and do. I think you've just got to use it in a way that you enjoy, that doesn't become toxic, and leave it at that, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And relating to those events, like, it's so funny because whenever there's an event like that, whether it be an aurora or like an eclipse or something that's a little bit rare, it's so interesting to see people's behavior. Like they have this FOMO, like they have to post something that's relevant to that event, or else they feel like people are gonna forget who they are or something. And oftentimes what you find is people will go out of their way to like piece together a composite that's relating to that thing just so that they can be relevant in the moment. And I find that approach to social media super kind of inauthentic, and just like, I don't know, maybe I'm cynical, but I kind of just see through it, like, and it just, to me, it's just not a good look. But maybe that's me.
I don't think it is. I think I don't know about you, but when that was it the 10th of May that it kicked off?
I don't know. That sounds right, because I was in Paris at the time, and I remember people were posting images of it, and then people knew I was in Paris, and they're like, "Can you see the Northern Lights?" I'm like, I'm in one of the brightest cities in the world. Like, no.
But it was like, I don't know about you, but like within 48 hours, I was like, if I see another aurora shot, they were just like, it was literally everywhere.
You get that repetition suppression where you see the same thing over and over and over again, and it just starts to lose impact.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Which is a shame, really, because that was I read an article in National Geographic where they were saying that was a 1 in 500 year solar storm, which that
pretty amazing.
It's amazing, right? That we got to see that, but then you're sicking yourself of looking at images of it because the force fed at you for such a intense at such an intense rate for a condensed amount of time, and you become conditioned not to respond, which is a real shame, actually.
Right. I mean, it's human psychology. It's really bizarre, actually. And I think that's one of the negative effects that Instagram has had on
I agree with that.
People's view of photography in general, is they become so like nothing surprises people anymore, and it's just unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. All right, Jim. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Last question. Tell us about some photographers that you'd recommend our audience learn a little bit more about.
Okay, so there are, I know everybody says this, but there are a lot of people that I'd recommend. A few that spring to mind. I know that you've got one of them lined up. So I won't mention his name. I'll let you keep that one quiet. Verity Milligan. I think Verity would be. I've heard her on a couple of podcasts. She's a very accomplished photographer, very, very good landscape photographer. I think she'd be really good. There's a guy called Daryl Walker, who's local to me. So he's a Northumberland-based photographer, but he does shoots for the likes of Land Rover and adventure type shoots. And he's fantastic. I think he would be a great interview. And I think one or two of the others that I mentioned, I think you've already had on. So they would be the two names I'd leave you with, Matt.
Well, I'll give you a little bit of credit. You also recommended Finn Beals and Bill Ward, and I follow both of them, and I really like both of their work as well. So we can mention them.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, but
Awesome.
Bill, I've heard Bill on a podcast. I haven't heard Finn Beals on a podcast, but I've seen some conversations with him. But Bill is a great conversation. He's actually an actor. He was on one of the not sitcom, the local soap operas, the UK soap operas. But he's a very accomplished photographer as well, so he'd be good.
Is there any other photographers doing like a focused effort on castles?
Not that I know of. No, actually, I haven't thought about that. But no, I don't think there is.
All right. Well, Jim Scott, the castle guy.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Awesome, Jim. Well, thanks again. This has been a lot of fun, and I look forward to seeing more work from your project.
Thank you very much, Matt. Really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you to Jim for joining me this week on the podcast. As always, I would love to hear listeners' thoughts about this week's episode over on Patreon. Whenever I release a new episode, it goes to our higher tier Patreon supporters first, often months in advance. On the scheduled public release date, that post on Patreon becomes public, and then anyone, even free members, can join in on the conversation. Just go to patreon.com/fstopandlisten and join in on the conversation. I can't wait to see you there. Cheers. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.